Midnight at Leap Castle. The wind moves through broken stone. The air grows cold, impossibly cold, as if winter itself has chosen this single moment to descend. You stand in the hallway where kings once walked, where brothers murdered brothers, where something ancient still watches from the shadows. Listen, do you hear it? That scratching sound coming from the walls, that whisper that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The locals won't come here after dark. They know what happens when the sun disappears behind the Irish hills. They've known for centuries. Their grandparents knew. Their great-grandparents knew. Knowledge passed down through generations, not as folklore, but as fact. Stay away from Leap Castle after dark. This is Leap Castle, the most haunted castle in Ireland, perhaps the most haunted castle in the world. For the next hour and a half, I'll take you through 5 centuries of bloodshed, betrayal, and terror. We'll walk through halls where families were slaughtered in their sleep. We'll descend into an oubliette, where prisoners were dropped onto spikes and left to rot for months, sometimes years. We'll meet the elemental, a creature so terrifying that even hardened paranormal investigators refuse to speak its name aloud. We'll explore secret passages that lead nowhere. We'll discover floors that have been erased from existence. We'll hear the stories of everyone who tried to live here and what happened when they realized they weren't alone. The castle is waiting, and it remembers everything, every scream, every betrayal, every drop of blood spilled on these ancient stones. Let's go inside. Our story begins not with ghosts, but with power, with land, with the kind of ambition that turns brothers into enemies and castles into tombs. The year is 1250. Ireland is a patchwork of warring clans, each fighting for survival in a landscape that offers no mercy. The Norman invasion has fractured the old Gaelic order. English influence creeps across the island like a slow tide. And in this chaos, power belongs to those strong enough to seize it and ruthless enough to keep it. In County Offaly, in the heart of the ancient kingdom of Islay, the O'Carroll clan builds a fortress. They call it Leim Weeb Hanain, Leap of the O'Bannons, named after a man who supposedly leaped from the rock upon which the castle stands. The legend says he jumped to escape enemies. Others say he jumped to escape something far worse. The stories conflict, but they all agree on one thing. The rock was a place of death long before the castle was built. The O'Carrolls don't care about legends. They're practical men. But this isn't just any fortress. This is a declaration of dominance. The O'Carrolls are chieftains of their sept, warriors who understand that in medieval Ireland, power is measured in stone and blood. The castle rises from the earth like a clenched fist. Thick walls, some measuring 10 feet thick at the base. Narrow windows, barely wide enough for an archer to fire through. A tower that watches over the surrounding countryside like a sentinel that never blinks, never sleeps, never looks away. Inside, great halls echo with the sounds of feasting and fighting. The O'Carrolls are generous hosts when it suits them. Music, poetry, endless supplies of meat and mead. But there's always an edge to these celebrations, always the sense that things could turn violent at any moment. Outside, the land stretches in every direction, land that the O'Carrolls will defend with their lives. Rich farmland, forests full of game, rivers teeming with fish. This is prosperity. This is power. And this is what makes Leap Castle so valuable and so dangerous. But already, in those early years, something is wrong. The builders report strange occurrences, tools disappearing overnight, only to reappear in impossible locations, placed carefully on ledges too high to reach, or inside walls that haven't been opened, sounds coming from empty rooms. whispers in a language that predates Irish Gaelic, that predates language itself. One mason swears he sees a figure watching him from the tower, a figure that vanishes when he climbs the stairs to investigate. He describes it as neither man nor woman, neither living nor dead. Just a presence, a watching thing. The mason refuses to work on the tower after that. He's reassigned to the lower levels. 2 weeks later, he falls from scaffolding and breaks his neck. The O'Carrolls dismiss these stories. They're practical men. Men of action. They don't believe in ghosts. They believe in swords and shields and the strength of their bloodline. Not yet. For 2 centuries, the O'Carroll dynasty thrives. They're not just warriors. They're patrons of the arts, supporters of the Gaelic tradition in an Ireland increasingly dominated by English culture. Bards sing their praises at gatherings across the kingdom. Poets immortalize their victories. Scribes record their genealogies in manuscripts that trace their lineage back to the ancient high kings of Ireland. The castle becomes a center of culture and power, a place where the old Irish ways flourish, even as English influence creeps across the island. Scholars study here. Musicians compose here. The finest minds in Ireland gather in Leap Castle's Great Hall to debate poetry, philosophy, law. But beneath this veneer of civilization, the O'Carrolls remain what they've always been: warriors, killers when necessary, ruthless when threatened, and increasingly, they're threatened by each other. The problem with power is that it's never enough. The problem with a dynasty is that it produces too many heirs, too many sons who believe they deserve to rule, too much ambition concentrated in too small a space. By the 1500s, the family is fracturing. The old system of tanistry, where the strongest or most capable family member inherits, rather than the eldest son, has created a culture of constant competition. Brothers eye each other with suspicion. Cousins plot against cousins. Every gathering, every feast, every celebration carries the potential for violence. The castle that was meant to protect the clan becomes the stage for its destruction. And it all begins in a chapel. In a room that's supposed to be sacred. In a moment that will stain Leap Castle forever. The year is 1532. Inside the castle's private chapel, a priest prepares to say Mass. His name is lost to history. One more casualty of time, one more forgotten victim. But we know he's not just any priest. He's a member of the O'Carroll family. In medieval Ireland, younger sons often join the church when there's no land for them to inherit. It's a respectable life, a safe life, a way to maintain status and influence without competing directly for power. The chapel itself is beautiful, small, intimate, with stone walls that muffle sound from the rest of the castle. High windows let in the morning light. The altar is simple but elegant, Irish oak, carved with Celtic designs that predate Christianity, ancient symbols incorporated into the new faith. The priest is focused on his ritual, on the prayers that connect earth to heaven, on the transformation of bread and wine into body and blood. He doesn't hear the chapel door open. He doesn't hear the footsteps on stone. His brother enters. Another O'Carroll, another claimant to power. The grievance between them is unclear. Maybe it's about land. Maybe it's about inheritance. Maybe it's about a woman, or an insult, or some slight so minor it would seem laughable if it hadn't ended in murder. Or maybe there's no reason at all. Maybe it's just the inevitable conclusion of a family that's taught itself to see threats everywhere, to trust no one, to strike first before you're struck. The brother draws his sword. Not quickly. Not in the heat of passion. Slowly. Deliberately. He knows what he's about to do. He's made his choice. The priest doesn't turn. He's focused on the ritual, on the prayers that he's said 1,000 times before, that he'll never say again. He only feels the blade as it plunges into his back. The steel slides between his ribs with almost surgical precision. The brother knows how to kill. He's practiced. He's done this before. The priest falls across the altar. His blood, meant to course through his veins for decades more, spills across sacred stone, red on white, life draining into death. He reaches out, perhaps for help, perhaps in forgiveness. The accounts don't say. Maybe he can't speak. Maybe there are no words for what he's feeling in this moment. Betrayal, pain, confusion, the terrible understanding that he's dying, and there's nothing he can do to stop it. His brother doesn't stay to watch him die. He leaves the chapel, leaves the body, leaves the stain that will never wash clean. They call it the bloody chapel now. And even after 500 years, nothing will grow near that altar. People have tried planting flowers, herbs, even weeds. Nothing survives. The ground itself rejects life, as if the earth remembers what happened here and refuses to forget. Nothing holy can survive in a place where family murdered family in the sight of God. The castle had learned what it would become, and this was only the beginning. Because the O'Carrolls had built something else into their castle, something far worse than a chapel stained with blood. They'd built a place where people could be forgotten, where bodies could disappear, where screams would echo in darkness that no light could penetrate. They'd built an oubliette. If the bloody chapel is the heart of Leap Castle's darkness, then the oubliette is its stomach, a place that devoured the living and never gave them back. The word oubliette comes from the French oublier. To forget, it's a perfect name. Because everyone who went into Leap Castle's oubliette was meant to be forgotten, erased, as if they'd never existed at all. Let me take you through what it was like. Not as history, not as abstract concept, but as experience. As the last thing you'd ever experience if you were unfortunate enough to end up there. Picture this. You're a prisoner. Maybe you're a member of a rival clan captured during a raid. Maybe you're a thief who stole from the wrong person. Maybe you're a servant who saw something you shouldn't have seen. Who knows something you shouldn't know? Maybe you're an O'Carroll yourself, a family member who became inconvenient, who posed a threat, who asked the wrong questions. It doesn't matter. The oubliette doesn't care who you are. It doesn't discriminate. You're brought to a small room in the lower levels of the castle. Nothing special. Just stone walls and a cold floor. No windows. A single torch for light. The guards don't speak to you. They don't explain. They've done this before. This is routine. In the center of the floor is a grate. Iron, heavy, old. The metal is dark with rust and something else. Something that looks like dried blood but could be anything. Could be nothing. The grate covers a hole, a circular opening barely wide enough for a human body to fit through. You can't see what's below. The darkness down there is absolute. Complete. The kind of darkness that existed before God said, "Let there be light." The kind of darkness that will exist after the last star burns out. You start to understand what's about to happen. You try to speak, to plead, to bargain, to explain that there's been a mistake, that you don't deserve this, that you have family, children, people who will miss you. The guards don't respond. They've heard it all before. Every prisoner says the same things. Every prisoner believes their case is different, special, worth reconsidering. They're all wrong. Two guards grab you. You struggle. Everyone struggles. It doesn't matter. They're stronger, and they know what they're doing. They lift the grate. The hinges scream. Metal on metal. A sound like torture. like the castle itself crying out at what's about to happen. They drag you to the edge. You look down. You see nothing, just darkness, absolute infinite darkness. And from that darkness comes a smell, not the smell of death. That's too simple, too clean. This is the smell of decay, of rot, of organic matter breaking down over months and years, of human waste and human flesh mixing together in an enclosed space with no ventilation, no light, no hope. It's the smell of hell. If hell has a smell, this is it. You try to scream, but one of the guards clamps a hand over your mouth. Not to silence you, no one can hear you down here anyway, but to keep you from biting your own tongue. It's a courtesy, the only one you'll receive. They push you through. You fall. In the darkness, you can't tell how far. Your mind tries to calculate. 8 feet, maybe 10, maybe more. Time stretches. Seconds feel like hours. You have time to think about your life, your mistakes, everyone you've loved and lost. You have time to pray. You have time to curse God for abandoning you. You have time to wish you'd never been born. And then you land. You feel them before you understand what they are. The spikes, wooden spikes, positioned with mathematical precision, sharpened to points, hardened in fire, arranged in a pattern designed by someone who understood human anatomy, who knew exactly how to maximize suffering. They're not close enough together to kill you instantly. That would be mercy, and mercy is not the purpose of the oubliette. But they're close enough that you can't stand, can't lie down, can't move without impaling yourself further. You're suspended in agony, in absolute darkness, listening to the sounds of the castle above you. Footsteps, laughter, music, the sounds of life continuing, the sounds of people eating and drinking and celebrating while you slowly, agonizingly die. Your eyes adjust to the darkness, not because there's any light, there isn't, but because your mind, desperate for input, starts creating images, hallucinations, phantoms. And then you realize you're not alone down here. You can feel them, the others who fell before you, their bones, their remains, all piled together in the dark. Your hand touches something, a skull, empty eye sockets staring at nothing, jaw hanging open in an eternal scream. You try to push it away, but moving just drives the spikes deeper. Pain explodes through your body. You scream. The sound echoes in the confined space, bouncing off stone walls, coming back to you distorted and inhuman. No one comes. No one ever comes. This is the oubliette, the forgotten place. And for 300 years, the O'Carrolls used it regularly. How long does it take to die in an oubliette? That depends on the wounds, on whether the spikes hit vital organs or just muscle and bone, on dehydration, on infection, on how strong you are, how much you want to live. Some people died in hours, others took days. One account, unverified but persistent in local folklore, speaks of a prisoner who survived for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of darkness and pain and slowly losing his mind. By the end, he was screaming in a language no one recognized, making sounds that weren't quite human anymore. When he finally died, the screaming didn't stop. People in the castle reported hearing it for years afterward, coming from below the floor. A sound of pure anguish that never ended, never stopped, just went on and on and on. The oubliette wasn't discovered until 1922. By then, the castle had changed hands. The O'Carrolls were long gone, their power broken, their dynasty ended, their legacy reduced to ruins and legends. A man named Captain Charles Pretty had purchased the property. He was renovating, trying to make the castle habitable again for the modern era. Workers were clearing out debris from the lower levels when they found it. A grate, rusted shut, covered with centuries of grime and what looked like dried blood. They tried to open it. The hinges had fused together. They had to use crowbars, hammers, brute force. It took hours. The metal screamed as it gave way. The same sound it had made hundreds of times before. The last sound hundreds of people had heard before falling into darkness. When it finally opened, the smell that emerged was overwhelming. Imagine death. Then multiply it by 300 years. Concentrate it in a space barely 20 feet across. That's what hit those workers. Grown men, tough men, men who'd fought in World War I, who'd seen things that would break lesser souls, ran from the room, vomiting, gasping for air. One man passed out. Another quit on the spot and never came back. But they went back. Eventually, they had to know what was down there. They lowered lamps on ropes. The light revealed a chamber roughly 20 feet deep and 15 feet across. Circular. Stone walls slick with moisture and something darker. And in that chamber, they found exactly what the O'Carrolls had intended. A mass of human remains, bones piled 3 feet deep, maybe more in some places, skulls grinning in the lamplight, femurs and ribs and vertebrae all mixed together in a grotesque sculpture of death. And among the bones, jewelry, buttons, scraps of clothing that had survived the centuries, pieces of leather, metal buckles, evidence of lives that ended in screaming darkness. The workers removed 3 cartloads of bones. 3 cartloads. They tried to count the skulls to determine how many people had died down there. They stopped counting at 150. Not because they'd finished, because they couldn't continue. Because the sheer weight of that number, 150 people, minimum, dropped into a hole and left to rot, was too much to bear. And those were just the intact skulls. How many had crumbled to dust? How many had been gnawed by rats until nothing recognizable remained? We'll never know the true count, but estimates range from 200 to 500 people. 500 lives ended in darkness. 500 people who were meant to be forgotten. But the castle remembers. The stones remember. And something else remembers too. Something that still lives in that space below the floor, feeding on 3 centuries of suffering, growing stronger with each passing year. The oubliette has been sealed, the grate welded shut, the opening covered with concrete and stone, but you can't seal away what happened there. You can't weld shut the memories of 300 years of horror. People still report hearing sounds from below the floor. Scratching, like fingernails on stone. Moaning, low and constant. Not quite human anymore. And sometimes, very rarely, but consistently enough that multiple witnesses have reported it. A voice, a single word, repeated over and over in the darkness. Remember. The castle obeys. By the early 1600s, the O'Carroll dynasty was collapsing. English colonization, internal feuds, and changing politics stripped them of their power. The wars, the plantations, the systematic destruction of the Gaelic order, all of it took its toll. Leap Castle, once the symbol of their dominance, fell into ruin. The great halls grew silent. The walls began to crumble. Nature started reclaiming the stone, covering the blood-soaked battlements with ivy and moss, as if trying to hide what had happened here. But Leap Castle wasn't finished. It was just waiting. In 1659, following the Cromwellian conquest of Ireland, the castle was granted to an English family named Darby. They were Protestants, representatives of the new order sweeping across Ireland, part of the plantation system designed to replace native Irish power with English control. Jonathan Darby looked at the ruins and saw opportunity, a chance to create something new from something old, A chance to build an English manor house in the Irish countryside, to civilize this wild place, to bring order to chaos. He couldn't have been more wrong. The Darbys rebuilt Leap Castle with English sensibilities. They added new wings, restored the Great Hall, installed proper windows with glass panes instead of arrow slits. They brought in furniture from England, carved oak tables, upholstered chairs, oil paintings of English countryside. They created gardens in the courtyard. They built a proper kitchen with modern conveniences. They turned the fortress into a manor house suitable for English gentry. For a while, it seemed to work. The castle came alive again with parties, with guests from Dublin and London, with all the trappings of civilized society. Music in the evenings, poetry readings, dinner parties that stretched late into the night. The Darbys were proud of what they'd accomplished. They'd tamed Leap Castle, civilized it, made it respectable. But the servants knew better. They always do. The Irish servants who worked at Leap Castle, cooking, cleaning, maintaining the grounds, they whispered to each other in Gaelic. Stories about doors opening by themselves, about footsteps in empty corridors that followed you, always staying just out of sight, never quite close enough to see. About cold spots that appeared without warning, even in the middle of summer, even in rooms with roaring fires. You'd walk through a doorway, and suddenly the temperature would drop 20 degrees. Your breath would fog. Frost would form on the windows. And then, just as suddenly, the warmth would return. Objects moved, not dramatically, not in ways that couldn't be explained, just small changes. A candlestick that was on the left side of the mantelpiece now on the right. A book that was closed now open. A chair facing a different direction than it had been an hour before. The servants developed strategies. They worked in pairs. They avoided certain rooms after dark. They whispered prayers in Irish, old prayers that predated Christianity, prayers to ward off spirits and malevolent forces. The Darbys dismissed these reports. Old castles make strange sounds. Servants are superstitious. There's always a rational explanation. Draft from the windows. Settling foundations. Mice in the walls. They had answers for everything. Until they didn't. The first documented sighting at Leap Castle happened in 1670. A maid named Bridget, her surname lost to history, was cleaning one of the upper rooms. It was midday, sunlight streaming through the windows, nothing threatening about the moment, nothing that should have frightened her. She looked up from her work and saw a woman standing by the window. The woman wore old-fashioned clothes, not just old, ancient. The style was from the previous century, from the time of the O'Carrolls, a long dress in dark fabric, hair worn long and unbound, which no respectable woman would do in public. The woman was staring out the window as if watching for something that never arrived. Her posture was rigid, tense, waiting. Bridget spoke. "Miss, are you lost?" The woman turned, and Bridget screamed, because where the woman's face should have been, there was only shadow, not darkness, not absence of light, but shadow that moved, that writhed, that seemed to absorb the light around it and transform it into something else. Something wrong. Bridget ran from the room. She ran down the stairs, through the corridors, out into the courtyard. She didn't stop running until she was outside the castle walls, gasping for breath, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. When the other servants found her, she was incoherent, babbling in Irish and English, switching between languages, unable to form complete sentences. It took hours before she could tell them what she'd seen. The butler, an Englishman, rational and skeptical, went to investigate. He took 2 other servants with him. They searched the room where Bridget had been working. Empty. No woman. No one. But the window was open. It had been closed when Bridget entered. They all remembered her closing it because of the cold wind. And on the windowsill, pressed into the dust, was the outline of two hands. Small hands. A woman's hands. As if someone had been leaning heavily on the sill, pressing down with all their weight, staring out at something only they could see. The butler closed the window, told the servants to forget what they'd seen, ordered Bridget never to speak of it again on threat of dismissal. But from that day forward, the woman at the window became a regular sight at Leap Castle. Always in the same spot, always watching, always waiting. The Darbys tried to maintain their rational worldview. They were English, Protestant, modern. They believed in science and reason. In explanations, that made sense. But the castle had other plans. The hauntings intensified, accelerated. As if the presence of the Darbys, these foreign intruders in a place built by Irish hands, soaked in Irish blood, had awakened something that had been dormant. Guests reported being woken in the middle of the night by someone or something pressing down on their chests, making it impossible to breathe. The phenomenon happened so frequently that certain guest rooms were quietly taken out of rotation. No explanation given. Just, that room is unavailable. Others heard voices, conversations in Irish Gaelic, using words and phrases that hadn't been common for centuries. Old Irish, pre-Elizabethan, the language of the O'Carrolls, discussions about land disputes, about feuds, about betrayals that had been settled centuries ago but apparently weren't forgotten. One guest, Dr. Michael Cleary, a scholar from Trinity College Dublin, recorded his experience in his journal. The entry is dated September 12, 1703. He wrote, "I woke at approximately 3 in the morning to find my room filled with a presence of unmistakable malevolence. I cannot describe it better than that. Not a ghost, not a specter, but a presence, a weight in the air, an intelligence that was examining me with the detached curiosity of a naturalist studying an insect. I felt that I was being assessed, measured, found wanting in some way I couldn't comprehend. The sensation lasted perhaps 30 seconds, perhaps an eternity. Time became meaningless. When it finally withdrew, and that's the only word that fits, it withdrew like a tide pulling back from the shore. I found myself covered in cold sweat, my heart racing, every muscle tensed for flight. I will not return to Leap Castle. I would rather sleep in a ditch than spend another night under that roof." Dr. Cleary was a respected academic, a man of science, not given to flights of fancy or supernatural speculation. He never returned to Leap Castle, and he never fully explained what he meant by presence. He would only say, when pressed, that some things are too visceral for words, that you have to experience them to understand, and that understanding comes at a price. But the most disturbing phenomenon was the sobbing. Night after night, the Darbys and their guests heard the sound of a woman crying. It came from different parts of the castle, sometimes the bloody chapel, sometimes the great hall, sometimes from inside the walls themselves, as if the sound were traveling through the stone like water through pipes. It was a sound of absolute heartbreak, of grief so profound it seemed to warp the air around it, the kind of crying that comes from loss so total, so complete, that there's no recovery, no moving on, just an endless well of sorrow. They tried to find the source, multiple times, organized searches with servants carrying lanterns, checking every room, every corridor, every hidden space. They found nothing. The sobbing continued. Eventually, they stopped looking. They learned to live with it. Some sounds at Leap Castle have no source, or rather, they come from a place the living can't reach. The Darby family lived at Leap Castle for 3 centuries. Generation after generation, they adapted to the hauntings, treating them almost like difficult relatives you learn to tolerate. They developed rules, unspoken at first, then formalized, then passed down as family wisdom. Don't go into the bloody chapel after dark. Don't open the door to the tower staircase unless absolutely necessary. If you hear your name called and you can't see who's calling, don't answer. If a room suddenly grows cold, leave immediately. If you see someone you don't recognize, assume they're dead and give them space. These weren't superstitions. They were survival strategies. Lessons learned through experience. Through the deaths and madness of family members who didn't follow the rules. But in 1922, everything changed. Ireland was fighting for independence. The War of Independence had given way to the Irish Civil War. Old grudges were being settled with bullets and fire. And Leap Castle, symbol of English plantation and occupation, found itself in the crossfire. On a June night, the exact date lost to the chaos of the era, Republican forces torched the castle. The Darbys barely escaped. They fled through secret passages that the O'Carrolls had built centuries before, emerging into the countryside as flames consumed their home. They watched from the hills as 3 centuries of history burned. The fire burned for 3 days. You could see the glow from miles away. Locals reported that the smoke smelled strange, not just wood and fabric, but something else, something organic and wrong. Some said it was the smell of centuries of death finally being released. Others claimed it was the castle itself burning, its very essence going up in flames. When the fire finally died, Leap Castle was a shell. The roof gone. The floors collapsed. The walls blackened and cracked. Everything the Darbys had built, everything they'd restored, reduced to ash and rubble. It should have been the end. But Leap Castle doesn't end. It endures, and it remembers. What came next would prove that fire can't cleanse everything, that some darkness survives any flame, that Leap Castle's worst horror was still waiting to be discovered. For decades after the fire, Leap Castle stood empty. A blackened skeleton against the Irish sky, windows like empty eye sockets, walls that had witnessed 5 centuries of horror now open to the elements, slowly crumbling, slowly returning to the earth. The locals wouldn't go near it, not during the day, certainly not at night. They said the fire had made it worse, that burning the castle had disturbed something that should have been left alone, that whatever lived there was now angry. And they were right. Travelers passing by on the road reported seeing lights in the windows. Impossible, since there were no longer any floors for lights to rest on, no rooms for people to occupy, just empty space and charred timber. But the lights were there, orange and flickering, like torches or candles, moving through the ruins as if being carried by unseen hands, following paths through rooms that no longer existed. Others heard sounds, screaming from inside the ruins. Not one voice, but many, overlapping, creating a chorus of agony that echoed across the countryside. People living half a mile away would wake in the middle of the night to the sound of it, would lie in their beds wondering if they should investigate, knowing they never would. Because everyone who lived near Leap Castle understood one fundamental truth. The castle was dying, but it was far from dead. And then, in 1974, everything changed again. A family named Ryan purchased the property. Peter and Anne Ryan, along with their young children. They were Irish, not English. They understood the history. They'd heard the stories, but they also saw potential. The bones of a great castle, a piece of Irish heritage that deserved to be preserved. They began restoration work, slowly, carefully, rebuilding what the fire had destroyed. And that's when they met the others, The ones who'd been there all along. The ones who'd never left. But before we talk about what the Ryans discovered, we need to go back. Back to 1909. Back to the moment when someone finally gave a name to Leap Castle's darkest resident. Now we come to the center of Leap Castle's darkness, to the entity that makes even experienced paranormal investigators pause before entering these walls, to something that isn't quite a ghost, because ghosts were once human, and this thing, whatever it is, was never human at all. They call it the elemental. The first recorded encounter happened in 1909. A woman named Mildred Darby, an occultist and writer who had married into the family, was walking through the castle's gallery. Let me tell you about Mildred. She wasn't some naive believer in spirits. She was educated, well-read, experienced in matters of the occult. She'd conducted seances across Ireland and England. She'd communicated with spirits, or believed she had. She'd studied under some of the leading occultists of her era. She thought she understood the supernatural. She thought she was prepared for anything Leap Castle could show her. She was wrong. It was late afternoon. The sun was still shining through the damaged windows, throwing long shadows across the gallery floor. She wasn't afraid. She'd walked this gallery hundreds of times. She knew every loose stone, every crack in the walls. She was thinking about dinner, about guests who were arriving that evening, about mundane, domestic concerns. And then she felt it. A hand on her shoulder. Not aggressive, not threatening. Just resting there. Heavy. Cold. Real. She turned. What she saw would haunt her for the rest of her life. She wrote about it later, trying to capture the experience in words. This is what she said. I was standing in the gallery looking down at the main floor when I felt somebody put a hand on my shoulder. The thing was about the size of a sheep, thin, gaunt, and shadowy in parts. Its eyes were two black holes in a face that wasn't quite a face. The horrible smell gave me a deadly nausea. It was human and inhuman at the same time. It was death, but also life. It was ancient and contemporary. It was everything wrong in the universe concentrated into a single form. The smell. Everyone who encounters the elemental mentions the smell. It's not the smell of death. That's almost pleasant compared to this. It's not decay or rot, though those elements are present. Witnesses describe it as sulfuric, yes, but also more than that, like burning hair and spoiled meat and diseased flesh, and something else, something that has no earthly equivalent. Some say it's the smell of pure malevolence, the smell of hatred given physical form. Others say it's the smell of hell, the actual literal smell of damnation. Mildred Darby was an experienced occultist. She'd studied the supernatural for years. She'd communicated with spirits. She'd performed rituals. She knew the difference between imagination and reality, between psychological phenomena and genuine paranormal experience. But the elemental terrified her in a way nothing else ever had. She wrote that looking into its eyes was like staring into an abyss that stared back with intelligence and hunger. Not just awareness, not just consciousness, but intelligence. The thing was thinking, assessing, making decisions based on some logic that human minds can't comprehend. And it was hungry, not for food, not for anything physical, but hungry in a way that made Mildred understand, on a deep primal level, that she was in the presence of something that fed on suffering, that needed pain and fear the way humans need air and water. The encounter lasted maybe 30 seconds, maybe less. Time became meaningless. Mildred couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even close her eyes. She was frozen, paralyzed not by fear but by the sheer presence of this thing. by the weight of its attention focused entirely on her. And then it was gone. Not gradually, not fading away, just gone, as if it had never been there. Mildred staggered. Her legs wouldn't hold her. She collapsed against the gallery railing, gasping for air, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. She never fully recovered from the encounter. She became obsessed with understanding what the elemental was, where it came from, why it haunted Leap Castle. She researched. She consulted with other occultists. She dove into Irish folklore, into pre-Christian beliefs, into theories about interdimensional beings and ancient spirits. She found no answers. Some questions have no answers. Some things exist beyond human understanding. Mildred died in 1937. Her last words, according to family members who were present, were, "It's here. It's come for me." No one else in the room saw anything, but they all smelled it. That sulfuric, rotting, indescribable smell. It filled the room, overwhelming everything else. And then Mildred was gone. But what is the elemental? Theories abound. None of them provable. All of them unsettling. Some say it's the accumulated evil of the castle itself, given form by centuries of violence and suffering. Every murder, every betrayal, every moment of cruelty absorbed into the stone and transformed into something conscious. The castle's pain made manifest. Others believe it's something far older, a pre-Christian entity that inhabited this land before the O'Carrolls ever laid the first stone of their fortress. A thing that was here when Ireland was young, when Druids performed their rituals on these hills, when human sacrifice was common and the barriers between worlds were thinner. A thing that fed on fear and pain long before Christianity gave names to such things. Long before humans had language to describe what they were experiencing. The most disturbing theory comes from modern paranormal researchers. They suggest the elemental isn't one entity but many. The combined consciousness of everyone who died in the Oubliette, merged into a single presence by the intensity of their shared suffering. Imagine it. Hundreds of people, dying in darkness, in agony, in absolute despair. Their last moments filled with nothing but pain and fear, and the terrible understanding that they've been forgotten, that no one will ever know what happened to them, that they'll simply disappear as if they'd never existed. All that suffering, all that consciousness, all that pain concentrated in a space barely 20 feet across. For 300 years, building, growing, merging, until it became something else, something new, a gestalt of agony and hatred, forever trapped in the place where they died. Whatever it is, the elemental doesn't behave like other ghosts. It doesn't haunt specific locations. It doesn't appear at particular times. It doesn't follow the rules that govern other supernatural phenomena. It comes when it wants, choosing its victims according to some logic only it understands. Some people never see it. They live in Leap Castle for years, decades, and never encounter the elemental. They see other ghosts. They experience other phenomena. But the elemental leaves them alone. Others encounter it multiple times, as if it's chosen them, marked them, decided that they're interesting enough to deserve its attention. In 1991, a paranormal investigator named Sean Ryan, no relation to the family that owns the castle, stayed overnight at Leap Castle. He was experienced. He'd investigated dozens of supposedly haunted locations across Ireland and England. He was skeptical by nature, trained to look for rational explanations before accepting supernatural ones. He came equipped with cameras, temperature gauges, EMF detectors, audio recorders. All the tools of modern ghost hunting. He wanted evidence. He wanted proof. He wanted something that would convince skeptics that the supernatural was real. He got more than he bargained for. Around 3 a.m., Ryan woke to that smell. He'd never encountered it before. He had no frame of reference for it. But his body knew immediately that something was wrong. Fundamentally wrong. Sulfuric. Overwhelming. Making him gag. Making his eyes water. Making his stomach churn with nausea. His temperature gauge, which he'd left running, recording data throughout the night, showed the room had dropped from 18 degrees Celsius to 3 degrees in less than a minute. 15 degrees. Impossible. No natural phenomenon could account for that kind of temperature change. His cameras malfunctioned simultaneously. Both of them. Batteries that had been fully charged, suddenly dead. Equipment that had worked perfectly just hours before, suddenly useless. And then he saw it. A shadow. Not just an absence of light, but something darker than darkness should be. Something that moved with purpose, with intention, with intelligence. It circled his bed, slowly, taking its time, examining him like a specimen under glass, like a scientist studying something that puzzled and fascinated them. Ryan tried to move. Couldn't. His body wouldn't respond. He was paralyzed, every muscle locked, unable to do anything but watch as this thing, this presence, continued its slow circuit of the room. He tried to speak. Couldn't. His vocal cords wouldn't work. His mouth wouldn't open. He tried to close his eyes. Couldn't. His eyelids wouldn't obey. He was forced to watch, to witness, to experience every second of the encounter. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, maybe a lifetime. Time becomes meaningless when you're face to face with something that shouldn't exist. When every instinct you have is screaming at you to run, to fight, to do anything, and your body simply won't respond. When it finally left, simply vanished, as if it had never been there, Ryan discovered he could move again. The paralysis lifted all at once, like a switch being flipped. He packed his equipment, didn't check the footage, didn't review the data, didn't do any of the things a proper investigator should do. He just packed everything into his bags and left. It was 3:30 a.m., still dark. He didn't care. He walked 6 miles to the nearest town rather than spend another minute in Leap Castle. He's given hundreds of interviews about his career investigating the paranormal. He's written books. He's appeared on television shows. He's discussed dozens of encounters, analyzed countless pieces of evidence, debated skeptics and believers alike. He refuses to discuss what happened in detail at Leap Castle. He says some experiences are too visceral for words, that you have to feel it to understand. That understanding comes at a price he wouldn't wish on anyone. When pressed, he'll only say this: whatever is in Leap Castle, it's not a ghost. Ghosts are echoes, remnants. This is something else, something that was never human, something that doesn't belong in our world but has found a way to exist here anyway. And it's hungry. He's never returned to Leap Castle. He says he never will. That some places are meant to be left alone. That some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. The elemental remains, waiting, choosing, appearing when it wants to, whom it wants, following rules only it understands. And no one, not the Ryans, not paranormal investigators, not priests or mystics or scientists, can explain what it is or why it's there. But it's not the only thing haunting Leap Castle's modern era. The castle is crowded with the dead, and some of them want to tell their stories. The elemental is the most famous, the most terrifying, but it's far from alone. Since the Ryan family purchased Leap Castle in 1974 and began restoration, they've documented dozens of entities, spirits, presences, ghosts, whatever you want to call them. Some are benign, some are tragic, some are deeply unsettling, and all of them are permanent residents of Leap Castle. Let me introduce you to them. There's the Red Lady. She's been seen by dozens of witnesses over the decades, always wearing the same thing, a red gown, floor length, in a style from the late 1500s or early 1600s. The fabric seems to shimmer in candlelight, catching highlights and shadows in ways that fabric shouldn't. She walks the hallways with purpose, not aimlessly, not drifting. She's searching for something, or someone. In her right hand, she carries a dagger. The blade is long, slightly curved, clearly visible even though she's translucent, even though you can see through her to the wall beyond. Some say she's searching for the brother who killed her. Others believe she's looking for her murdered child, a baby taken from her and killed to prevent a contested inheritance. The stories conflict. The details change depending on who's telling them. But everyone agrees on one thing. She never speaks. She never acknowledges the living. She just walks, following the same path through the castle night after night, decade after decade, century after century. And her gown trails blood. Red droplets that fall from the hem, that stain the floor for a moment before vanishing. As if the blood is fresh. As if whatever happened to her is still happening over and over, an endless loop of tragedy. One witness, a guest staying at the castle in 1998, reported following her. Curious, wanting to see where she went. He followed her through 3 corridors, up 2 flights of stairs, into a section of the castle that was still being restored. The Red Lady walked to a specific spot on the floor, stood there for a moment, then looked down at the dagger in her hand. And then she plunged it into her own chest. The witness screamed, ran forward to help her. But by the time he reached the spot where she'd been standing, she was gone. Nothing there. Just empty space and cold air. But on the floor, in the exact spot where she'd been standing, there was a stain. Old. Dark. The kind of stain that's been there so long it's become part of the stone itself. Blood. Obviously, blood. But whose? And when? The Ryan family doesn't know. The castle's records don't mention any suicide in that location. No stories exist about a woman in red killing herself. But the stain is there, and the Red Lady keeps returning to it, keeps reenacting whatever happened in that spot, keeps dying over and over again. Then there's Emily. Just Emily. No last name, no clear identification. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, with long dark hair and a white dress that might once have been elegant, but now seems faded, worn, out of time. She appears in the main hall, usually during the day. Sunlight streaming through windows. Nothing threatening about the moment. She's playful, mischievous. She's been seen playing with visitors' children, running through rooms, laughing. A clear, bright laugh that sounds exactly like a living child. So convincing that people often don't realize she's a ghost until she does something impossible. Walks through a wall, or vanishes mid-sentence, or appears in a second-floor window when there's no way she could have gotten there that fast. The Ryan children grew up with Emily. They played with her. They talked about her the way you'd talk about any childhood friend. Emily wants to play hide-and-seek. Emily says there's something in the tower. Emily doesn't like that man. At first, Peter and Anne Ryan thought Emily was an imaginary friend. All children have them. It's normal. Healthy, even. But then, visitors started seeing her. People who'd never been to Leap Castle before. People who didn't know the stories. They'd mention the little girl they'd seen playing in the hall. Describe her in perfect detail. The white dress, the dark hair, the bright laugh. And the Ryans would have to explain. That's Emily. She's been here longer than we have. She's part of the castle. But Emily has another side. When you look directly at her, really look, not just glance, her smile becomes something else. The corners of her mouth stretch a little too wide. Her eyes reflect light in a way that human eyes shouldn't. And for just a moment, you see something underneath. Something not quite human. Something wearing a child's face, like a mask. Several witnesses have reported this. The sudden shift. The moment when Emily stops being a playful child and becomes something ancient and unknowable pretending to be a child. And then, just as quickly, she's back to normal. Laughing, running, playing. What is Emily? A genuine spirit of a child who died here? Or something else, something that understood that appearing as a child would make people lower their guard, would make them trust her? No one knows. And Emily isn't telling. More disturbing are the two Emilys. Yes, two, twin girls, both named Emily. Both died in the castle under mysterious circumstances sometime in the late 1700s. The exact details are lost to history, but local folklore speaks of a fever, of a locked room, of parents who waited too long to call a doctor. They appear together. Always. Never separate. Always holding hands. Always silent. They're younger than the other Emily, maybe 5 or 6 years old. They wear matching dresses in pale blue. Their hair is the same length, the same style, perfectly symmetrical. They watch. That's all they do. They stand in doorways, in windows, at the tops of stairs, and they watch. Their heads move in unison, tracking visitors as they move through the castle. Left, right, up, down. Perfect synchronization. They never blink. Their expressions never change. They just watch with dark, unreadable eyes that seem to absorb light rather than reflect it. Some say they're warning people, trying to communicate something important. Others believe they're waiting for something. Or someone. Their parents, perhaps. Or whatever killed them. Or something else entirely. One witness, a paranormal researcher visiting in 2003, tried to communicate with them. She approached slowly, speaking softly, asking if they needed help, if there was something they wanted to say. The two Emilys watched her approach, still holding hands, still silent. When she got within about 5 feet, they both smiled simultaneously. The same smile. Perfect mirrors of each other. And then they were gone. Just vanished. The researcher stood there alone in the corridor, suddenly aware of how quiet the castle had become, how the temperature had dropped, how every instinct she had was screaming at her to leave. She did. She packed her equipment and left within the hour. She's never returned. When asked about the experience, she'll only say, "They're not children. I don't know what they are, but they're not children. Children don't smile like that. Children don't watch like that. There's something else wearing children's faces, and whatever they're waiting for, I don't want to be there when it arrives." Then there are the soldiers. Multiple witnesses have reported seeing men in military uniforms moving through the castle, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups. Always purposeful, always moving as if they have somewhere to be, something to do. The uniforms vary. Some appear to be from the Irish Confederate Wars of the 1640s, others from the Williamite War of the 1690s, still others from the Irish Rebellion of 1798. Leap Castle saw military action during all these conflicts. Men died here, some in battle, others executed afterward. The castle changed hands multiple times, and each change was marked with blood. These soldiers don't interact with the living. They don't acknowledge that anyone else is present. They're locked in their own time, their own reality, replaying whatever mission they were on when they died. One witness reported seeing a soldier in a Cromwellian uniform running through the Great Hall, clutching his chest, blood streaming between his fingers. The soldier ran straight toward a wall that didn't exist in his time, and passed through it without slowing down. Another saw a group of 3 men, Irish by their appearance, huddled in a corner of the tower, whispering urgently to each other, planning something, plotting. When the witness tried to get closer, they all turned to look at him simultaneously. Their eyes were empty, hollow, like windows into nothing. And then they faded, slowly, over the course of maybe 10 seconds, gradually becoming translucent, then transparent, then gone, leaving only the smell of gunpowder and blood. And then there are the sounds. Because Leap Castle is never silent. Even when no one's inside, the walls remember. Footsteps echo through empty corridors, heavy boots, military cadence, or light steps, a woman's shoes on stone, or children running, laughing, playing games that ended centuries ago. Doors slam in rooms that no longer have doors, the crash of wood on wood, the rattle of latches and hinges, clear and distinct. But when you investigate, there's nothing there, just empty doorways, just air. Music plays, medieval music, the kind performed in the Great Hall during the O'Carroll era. Harps and pipes and voices raised in songs that haven't been sung for 500 years. The melodies are hauntingly beautiful, complex, sophisticated, the kind of music that takes years of training to perform. But there are no musicians, no instruments, just sound, floating through the castle, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Voices argue in Irish Gaelic, heated discussions about land rights, about inheritance, about insults and betrayals. The same arguments that the living O'Carrolls had centuries ago, still continuing, still unresolved, still echoing through time. Peter Ryan, the current owner, has lived with all of this for 50 years. He's raised children here. He's celebrated holidays. He's made Leap Castle a home. He says you get used to it. The sounds, the sightings, the presence of the dead. He says most of them are harmless, sad perhaps, tragic certainly, but not dangerous, most of them. But there are parts of the castle the Ryans avoid, rooms they won't enter after dark, sections of the tower where the temperature is always 20 degrees colder than it should be, places where even the family dog refuses to go, where he'll stop at the threshold and whine, hackles raised, every instinct telling him that something is wrong. Because living at Leap Castle means accepting something fundamental. You're never alone here. The castle is crowded with the dead, with memories given form, with pain that never heals, and tragedies that never end. And all of them, the Red Lady, Emily, the 2 Emilys, the soldiers, the sobbing woman, the priest in the bloody chapel, the victims in the Oubliette, all of them are just symptoms, evidence of something deeper, something embedded in the castle's very structure. The architecture itself holds the final secrets, and those secrets explain why Leap Castle can never be just a building, why it's something more, something conscious, something that remembers. A castle isn't just stone and mortar, it's intention made manifest. Every wall tells you something about the people who built it. Every room reveals their priorities. Every hidden passage exposes their fears. And at Leap Castle, the architecture itself is a confession of paranoia, of violence, of a family that trusted no one, not even themselves. Let's start with what we can see. The castle's main structure is a tower house, typical of Irish fortifications from the medieval period. 4 stories, each level designed with a specific purpose. The ground floor was for storage and defense. Thick walls, some measuring 10 feet thick at the base. Small windows, barely wide enough for an archer to fire through. Easily defended against attack. A single entrance with a heavy oak door reinforced with iron. This floor could be held by a handful of men against an army. The second floor housed the Great Hall, where the clan gathered for feasts and councils. high ceilings, a massive fireplace, space for dozens of people. This was where the public life of the O'Carrolls happened. The ceremonies, the celebrations, the displays of power and wealth. The third floor contained private chambers for the family. Smaller rooms, more intimate. This was where the O'Carrolls slept, where they conducted their private business, where they let their guards down. Or tried to. And the fourth, the top of the tower, served as both lookout and last refuge if the castle was breached. A final defensive position, a place where the family could retreat if everything else failed. That's the official layout, the one recorded in architectural surveys, the one visitors see. But that's just the surface. Leap Castle has another architecture, one that lives in the spaces between the spaces, in the walls themselves. Secret passages riddle the castle like veins in a body. Dozens of them. Maybe more. The Ryan family is still discovering new ones. Some were practical. Escape routes if the castle was under siege, allowing the family to flee while enemies stormed the main entrance. These passages lead from the upper floors down to ground level, then out through hidden exits in the castle walls, emerging into the surrounding countryside. Smart. Standard. Every well-designed fortress has escape routes. But other passages serve darker purposes. Surveillance passages. Narrow tunnels barely wide enough for a single person. Running through the walls between rooms, with small openings, spy holes, that allow someone to watch and listen without being seen. The O'Carrolls used these to spy on their guests, on their servants, on each other. Imagine hosting a feast in the Great Hall. Music and laughter and wine flowing freely. Everyone pretending to be friends, to be allies, to trust each other. While in the walls, hidden in darkness, someone watches, listening to every conversation, recording every indiscretion, gathering information that can be used later, stored, weaponized. Trust was a luxury in medieval Ireland. Paranoia was survival. The Ryan family has found passages that don't appear on any historical records. Tunnels that lead from room to room through paths that make no architectural sense. Passages that twist and turn, that climb and descend, that seem designed not for efficiency, but for confusion. Some dead end mysteriously. You follow them for 20 feet, 30, expecting them to emerge somewhere. And then, nothing. Just a blank wall. No door. No exit. Just stone. Why build a passage that leads nowhere? What's the purpose? Unless it didn't always lead nowhere. Unless something was sealed up, walled off, hidden so completely that even the existence of the passage was meant to be forgotten. Other passages open into chambers that serve no discernible purpose. Small stone rooms, maybe 8 feet by 8 feet. No windows, no furniture, no decoration. Just bare stone walls and cold floors, and iron rings embedded in the walls. Rings that once held chains. You can still see the wear marks on the stone where the chains rubbed. Back and forth. Back and forth. For hours. Days. Years. These weren't storage rooms. These were holding cells. Private prisons where the O'Carrolls could keep people, rival clan members, inconvenient relatives, witnesses to things that needed to stay secret, indefinitely, without anyone knowing they were there. How many people died in those rooms? How many were kept there until they went mad? Until they forgot their own names? Until they stopped being human and became just screaming things in the darkness? The stones don't tell. But sometimes, the Ryan family reports, you can hear sounds coming from those rooms, even though they're empty now, even though no one's been chained there for centuries. Rattling, like chains moving, like someone trying desperately to break free. One passage, discovered in 2003, connects the bloody chapel to the room directly below it. Why would you need a secret passage from a chapel? A place of worship, a place of sanctuary. What possible purpose could that serve? The answer lies in what that lower room was used for. It's the chamber that once housed the Oubliette. Think about the geometry of that, the symbolism. A chapel where a priest was murdered, connected by a secret passage to a room where hundreds of people were dropped into darkness to die. Heaven and hell, connected by a hidden corridor. Was the passage used to move bodies? To dispose of victims from the chapel murders more discreetly? To access the Oubliette without being seen by the rest of the castle? Or was it something else? Something more theological? The O'Carrolls were complicated people. Violent. Brutal. But also deeply religious. Maybe they saw the connection as necessary. The priest in the chapel above, praying for the souls of the dying below, or listening to their screams, using their suffering as a reminder of what awaits sinners, what awaits all of us. A prisoner is brought to the castle, thrown into the lower room, dropped through the grate onto the spikes, and in the chapel above, a priest says prayers, interceding with God for mercy that will never come. There's a symmetry to it, a cruel poetry that the O'Carrolls might have appreciated. Heaven above, hell below, a secret passage connecting them, and in both places, blood on the floor. Then there's the matter of the missing floor. This is one of Leap Castle's deepest mysteries, one that's never been solved. Historical records, architectural surveys, tax documents, descriptions by visitors all indicate that Leap Castle once had 5 levels. Not 4, 5. Somewhere between the original construction and the present day, an entire floor disappeared. Not destroyed, not collapsed, not burned in the 1922 fire. Just sealed up, walled off, erased from the official layout of the castle. Where is it? The measurements suggest it's between the 2nd and 3rd floors. There's a gap, 10 feet, maybe 12. Enough space for an entire level. Rooms, corridors, whatever the O'Carrolls built there. But you can't access it. There are no stairs leading to it. No doors. No windows. From the inside, you go from the 2nd floor directly to the 3rd, with no indication that anything's missing. The Ryan family has searched. They've examined every wall on the 2nd floor, looking for sealed doorways, for evidence of construction that blocked off access. They've done the same on the 3rd floor, measuring everything, trying to find the inconsistency. They've found nothing. The floor is there, the mathematics prove it, but it's completely inaccessible, as if someone went to enormous effort to ensure that no one would ever find it again. What's on that missing floor? What did the O'Carrolls, or perhaps the Darbys, want so badly to hide that they literally erased an entire level from existence? Sometimes, late at night, the Ryan family hears sounds coming from that missing floor. Footsteps, clear and distinct, walking on boards that supposedly don't exist anymore. Heavy footsteps, boots, military cadence, walking back and forth, as if someone's pacing, thinking, making decisions. Furniture being moved, the scrape of wood on wood, of heavy objects being dragged across a floor that isn't there, chairs, tables, something larger, something that takes multiple people to move, and voices, muffled, indistinct. You can't make out words, just the rhythm of conversation. People talking, arguing, planning something. Peter Ryan has tried to find the source. He stood between the 2nd and 3rd floors, trying to pinpoint exactly where the sounds are coming from. They're definitely between the floors, in that missing space, in rooms that he can't access and can't see. What's happening up there? Who's up there? Or maybe the better question is, when is it happening? Are these sounds from the past, echoes of events that occurred centuries ago? Or is something still happening on that missing floor? Some activity that continues in a space that's been cut off from our reality? The Ryan family doesn't have answers, just more questions. And the sounds continue. Let's talk about the windows. This is where the O'Carrolls' paranoia becomes most obvious, most damning. The castle has dozens of windows. Most of them are what you'd expect, narrow slits designed for defense, allowing archers to fire at attackers while minimizing exposure. But some of the windows don't face outward. They face inward, toward the courtyard, toward other parts of the castle itself. Why would you need arrow slits facing your own courtyard? What were the O'Carrolls defending against inside their own walls? The answer lies in the clan's history. The O'Carrolls weren't unified. They weren't a cohesive family working toward common goals. They were fractured, distrustful, constantly maneuvering against each other. Multiple branches of the family lived in Leap Castle simultaneously. But they weren't living together. They were living in proximity, each group occupying their own section, each watching the others for signs of treachery. The castle wasn't a home, it was a collection of armed camps under one roof. Those inward-facing windows weren't for defense against external enemies. They were for internal warfare, for the inevitable moment when brother turned against brother, when cousin attacked cousin, when the family's fractures became violent. The architecture anticipated civil war. It was designed for it, built with the understanding that sooner or later the O'Carrolls would turn on each other. And they did, multiple times. The murder in the Bloody Chapel is just the most famous example. But how many other murders happened at Leap Castle? How many bodies were dropped into the Oubliette, not by enemies, but by family members? How many O'Carrolls died at the hands of other O'Carrolls, shot through those inward-facing windows by relatives who'd decided that this cousin, this brother, this uncle had become too dangerous to live? The architecture knows. The stones remember. And perhaps that's why Leap Castle is so haunted. Not because of any single tragedy, but because the tragedy was built into its very structure. Because paranoia and violence and mistrust were literally embedded in its walls. The O'Carrolls designed Leap Castle to be a fortress against the world. But in doing so, they created a fortress against themselves. A place where no one could ever truly relax, never fully trust, never let their guard down. They built a prison. And then they lived in it. And then they died in it. And all of that, all the fear, all the suspicion, all the violence, seeped into the stone, became part of the castle's essence, transformed it into something more than just a building, into something conscious, something that remembers, something that never forgets. Now, after 5 centuries, we can finally understand what it all means. We've walked through 5 centuries together. We've seen the O'Carrolls rise from ambitious chieftains to a dynasty that dominated County Offaly. We've watched them build Leap Castle, stone by stone, room by room, transforming a rocky hill into a symbol of power. We've witnessed the fracturing, the paranoia, the moment when ambition turned inward and began consuming itself. We've stood in the Bloody Chapel where a brother murdered his priest brother at the altar, where blood spilled on sacred stone and stained it forever. We've descended, in our minds if not in body, into the Oubliette, that terrible pit where hundreds of people were dropped onto spikes and left to die in darkness, where their bones piled 3 feet deep, where their screams echoed for 300 years and still echo today, in some form, to those who listen closely enough. We've met the Darbys, those English settlers who thought they could civilize this place, who thought that renovation and restoration could erase the past. We've watched them learn, slowly and painfully, that Leap Castle doesn't forget. that it never forgets. We've encountered the elemental, that thing that was never human, that smells of sulfur and hatred, that examines the living with cold intelligence and unknowable hunger, that terrifies even the bravest souls who dare to spend a night within these walls. We've been introduced to the other residents, the Red Lady with her trailing blood, Emily with her bright laugh and wrong smile, the two Emilys who watch and wait and never blink. We've explored the architecture itself, the secret passages, the missing floor, the inward-facing windows that anticipated civil war, all the ways that paranoia and mistrust were literally built into the walls. And now we come to the question that matters most. What does it all mean? Why does Leap Castle, this one fortress among thousands in Ireland, this particular pile of stone in County Offaly, carry such weight of darkness? Why is it considered the most haunted castle in Ireland? Perhaps in the world? I think the answer lies not in any single event, but in the accumulation. Every place has a history. Every old building has seen violence, tragedy, death. That's the nature of time. People live, people suffer, people die, and the places where they lived remember, in some small way, what happened there. But most places had balance, moments of light between the darkness, celebrations between tragedies, joy between sorrows, the full spectrum of human experience mixing together, creating something complex and nuanced. Leap Castle never had that balance. From the moment the first stone was laid, it was a place of conflict, of suspicion, of fear wearing the mask of strength. The O'Carrolls didn't just build a fortress to protect themselves from enemies. They built it to protect themselves from each other. The secret passages weren't just for escape. They were for surveillance. The hidden rooms weren't just for storage. They were for imprisonment. The inward-facing windows weren't just architectural flourishes. They were firing positions for internal warfare. The castle's design reveals the truth about its builders. They trusted no one. Not their neighbors. Not their allies. Not their family. Not themselves. And that mistrust became self-fulfilling. When you build a place based on paranoia, you create paranoia. When you design your home to anticipate betrayal, you make betrayal inevitable. When you wall yourself in with suspicion, suspicion becomes your reality. The O'Carrolls created their own doom. The castle they built to protect their dynasty became the stage for its destruction. Brother murdered brother. Cousin betrayed cousin. The family ate itself alive while the walls watched and remembered. And when the O'Carrolls finally fell, when the Darbys took over, the cycle continued. The castle had learned what it was. It had absorbed 5 centuries of darkness. It had become something more than stone. It had become a repository for human fear and violence and suffering. And it attracted more. The Darbys experienced phenomena that the O'Carrolls never reported. The hauntings intensified. New ghosts appeared. The elemental revealed itself, as if the castle, having tasted that much darkness, wanted more, needed more, had developed an appetite for suffering that could never be satisfied. Today, Leap Castle stands partially restored. The Ryan family has done remarkable work. They've rebuilt walls, restored rooms, made parts of the castle habitable again. They've preserved an important piece of Irish heritage. They should be commended for that. But they'll tell you, and they're honest about this, that living at Leap Castle means living with the dead. It means accepting that you share your home with presences that were there before you arrived and will be there long after you're gone. It means waking up to sounds you can't explain, seeing shadows that don't match any light source, feeling watched in empty rooms, smelling sulfur when nothing's burning, hearing your name whispered in the dark. It means understanding, on a deep and visceral level, that you're never truly alone there, that the past is always present, that the dead walk beside the living, separated by nothing more than perception. And sometimes not even that. Most people couldn't live like that, wouldn't want to. The idea of sharing your home with ghosts, with entities, with something like the elemental, it's too much, too unsettling, too fundamentally wrong. But the Ryans have found a way. They've learned to coexist with the supernatural, to acknowledge it, respect it, but not fear it. Well, not fear most of it. Even the Ryans won't discuss the elemental in detail. Even they avoid certain rooms after dark. Even they have boundaries, places they won't go, things they won't do. Some things demand fear. Some things have earned it. Leap Castle is a warning. It shows us what happens when fear becomes the foundation of a place, when paranoia replaces trust, when family turns against family, when we build walls, physical and mental, to protect ourselves from threats that exist primarily in our own minds. The O'Carrolls built their castle to make themselves safe, but they created their own prison. They surrounded themselves with stone walls 10 feet thick, but the real walls were in their minds. The real fortress was their inability to trust, to love, to live without suspicion. And those mental walls, those barriers of fear and mistrust, they're still there, still standing, still inhabited by everyone who ever died believing they were alone, believing they were forgotten, believing that no one cared what happened to them. The stones remember all of it. The architecture holds all of it. The castle, whatever it's become after 5 centuries of absorbing human darkness, it knows all of it, and it will never let go. Leap Castle, the most haunted castle in Ireland, a place where 5 centuries of darkness live in every stone, where the past refuses to stay buried, where something that was never human walks the halls, carrying the smell of hell with it, where the dead outnumber the living, and always will. We've spent the last 2.5 hours exploring its history, its hauntings, its architecture, its secrets. We've descended into its darkest places and emerged, hopefully, intact. But Leap Castle isn't unique. It's just the most infamous, the most documented, the most willing to reveal its secrets. Because Ireland is full of castles, hundreds of them, each one built on ambition and blood, each one holding its own secrets, each one remembering things the living would rather forget. There are castles where entire families vanished in a single night, where bloodstains never faded, no matter how much they were scrubbed, where the Catholic Church sent priests with holy water and prayers, and those priests left defeated, terrified, refusing to speak about what they'd encountered. There are castles where the walls whisper in languages that haven't been spoken for 1,000 years, where children's laughter echoes through empty nurseries, where something watches from the towers, patient and eternal, waiting for reasons only it understands. There are thin places in Ireland, places where the barrier between our world and others grows weak, places where the dead don't stay dead, places where time becomes fluid, where past and present exist simultaneously, where walking through a doorway might take you to another century entirely. These places are waiting, just like Leap Castle waited for 5 centuries, slowly filling with darkness, slowly becoming what it is now. Just like all these old stones wait, patient, timeless, eternal, for someone to walk through their doors and remember what happened there. Because that's what these places want, ultimately. Not to frighten us, not to harm us, but to be remembered, to have their stories told, to have witnesses acknowledge that yes, these things happened, yes, people suffered here, yes, this matters. The stones remember. They hold these stories in their molecules, in the very structure of their being. They've absorbed centuries of human experience, joy and sorrow, love and hate, birth and death, and transformed it into something permanent, something that can't be erased or forgotten or dismissed. And when you visit these places, when you walk through their halls and touch their walls and breathe their air, you become part of that story. You become a witness, a link in a chain that stretches back centuries and will continue forward long after you're gone. That's why we explore these places, why we tell these stories. Not for entertainment, though they certainly are that. Not for cheap thrills or easy scares, but because they matter. Because understanding how humans built these places tells us something fundamental about ourselves. About our capacity for violence and paranoia? Yes, but also about our resilience, our ability to endure, our refusal to be forgotten. Every ghost is a memory refusing to fade. Every haunting is a story demanding to be told. Every dark castle is a monument to the complicated, contradictory, tragic, beautiful reality of human existence. Leap Castle has stood for 5 centuries. It will likely stand for 5 more. The stones will continue to remember. The dead will continue to walk its halls. The elemental will continue to appear to those it chooses. The oubliette will continue to whisper from below the floor. And perhaps that's fitting. Perhaps that's exactly what should happen. Because forgetting would be the real tragedy. Allowing all that suffering, all those lives, all those stories to simply disappear as if they never existed. That would be the true horror. So we remember. We tell the stories. We acknowledge the darkness without being consumed by it. And we recognize that places like Leap Castle are teachers. They show us what happens when fear drives decision-making, when paranoia replaces trust, when we build our lives around suspicion instead of connection. The O'Carrolls built Leap Castle to keep themselves safe. But they created something that destroyed them. That lesson echoes through time, as relevant today as it was 500 years ago. Build your life on fear, and fear will consume you. Build your home on suspicion, and suspicion will destroy you. Create walls to keep others out, and you'll find you've only imprisoned yourself. The castle remembers this lesson. It will remember it forever. And now, so will you. Thank you for walking through Leap Castle with me, for bearing witness to its history, for listening to the stories of the forgotten, for acknowledging that these lives, these deaths, these tragedies, they matter. Sweet dreams, and maybe leave a light on tonight. You never know what might be watching from the shadows. The stones remember. They always remember.